I mean, honestly, there's no price tag on peace of mind. The ability to be able to lay your head down at night and get a good night's sleep because you're not worried about what's going to happen tomorrow or how you're going to make things work or will your children be okay.
Welcome to the Verdict Signal podcast, where we feature how top attorneys help people make informed choices, avoid common mistakes, and move forward with confidence. Now, enjoy the show, and here's your host.
Daniel Gao here. I'm the host of Verdict Signal, and today we're expanding our conversations to the experts who protect what people build, their careers, families, and businesses. I have Patricia Van Haren, a partner at Marathi Newfer LLP, who has dedicated more than 2 decades to working in family law. As an attorney, she's built her career around helping families navigate challenging transitions with clarity, steadiness, and practical solutions. Patricia is deeply committed to the collaborative divorce process and currently serves as the current president of Collaborative Practice California, as well as a past president of Collaborative Divorce Solutions of Orange County. She's also on the board of directors for IACP. She's widely respected among her peers for her leadership in promoting non-adversarial approaches to divorce and for her ability to manage high-conflict situations thoughtfully and effectively. In 2023, she received the Eureka Award in recognition of her contributions to collaborative law. So, Patricia, welcome and glad to have you here.
Thank you, Daniel, and thanks for having me on today.
So let's start from the very beginning. How did you first get interested in the legal field?
Great question. So honestly, as long as I can remember, I loved law. When I was cleaning out my mother's house, I don't know, a few years ago, I found a picture and I must have been in first or second grade. And, all the kids do, what do I want to be when I grow up? And there's this cute little stick figure doll with a triangle dress that I had drawn on there or drew on there. And it said when I grew up, I wanted to be a lawyer because I couldn't even spell lawyer yet. So, so I always wanted to do that. My mother was an avid watcher of crime dramas. And so as I grew up, I loved to watch any kind of legal show, LA Law, CSI, Criminal Minds, all of that.
Okay. And so what led you to focus specifically on family law?
Also a great question. I think several things led me there as far as in my personal life. So my parents went through a divorce that started when I was in middle school, ended when I was in high school, very high conflict. So I got to see that from that unique child perspective. And then as I was older, I got married young in college, had my kids, and then I ended up getting a divorce myself. Mine was not as high conflict as my parents. And so I just gravitated towards family law and felt like I want to help other people do this. And I want to do it in a way that's not damaging to the family.
Makes sense. Now, what's one thing you wish more people understood about working with an attorney such as yourself?
So I think one thing that I would love everybody to understand is that you don't need to go to court to get divorced. And you don't need to get along with your spouse to stay out of court. A lot of people think that mediation or collaborative law or out of court resolutions are designed for people who like each other and get along. And that's not necessarily the case. Like those people, a lot of them are staying married and don't need the process at all. And so we do have tools that can carry these cases. The only thing this couple needs to agree on is we don't want to go to court. And so I do a lot of high conflict mediations and high conflict collaborative cases. And we build the team to adapt to that family.
Got it. Now, in your introduction, it talks about you being helping with collaborative divorce, which I think is something that not most people would think about those two words together, collaborative divorce. So
Yeah.
could you explain exactly what that means?
Yes, yes. So collaborative divorce is an approach. So it is a private, confidential process for getting a divorce. And you use various professionals. So if we were in a litigated case, we'd have each of the spouses, they'd have their attorneys, they'd argue in front of a judge.
Mhm.
In a collaborative divorce, each person's going to have their own attorney that's been through some significant collaborative training. So they're trained to keep the case out of court, and to work together. We might also have a financial neutral, which might be a forensic accountant. So in a litigated case, you're each going to have your own forensic accountant. They're going to be running options of reports and looking at the numbers. In a collaborative case, we're going to have one financial neutral. They're going to prepare these joint reports and have options to present. And the attorneys are going to help the parties come to an agreement. We also might have and often have a mental health professional on the team. So they're going to work as a facilitator or a divorce coach. So instead of a judge telling you what you have to do, we're going to have these case managers helping us find what we can do and finding an agreement that works for both spouses. So it's a very structured process. We have several steps through the process, but instead of having hearings in front of a judge, we're going to have team meetings where both parties are there with their attorneys and they're working together. And in the same time, they're learning new ways to communicate with themselves. So if you have children, even if you divorce, you're always going to have to interact with that spouse. And
Mm.
a lot of people say, oh, well, once my kids are 18, I don't need to interact. Well, that's just not true. Your kid's going to graduate from high school, probably college, get married. Then you may have these grandchildren and they're going to have birthday parties and events. And so how do you be in the same room as your spouse once that marriage is gone? So we give them the tools to do that.
Okay. So I kind of have this two-part question then is if people are going through a divorce, do they need a lawyer for that process? And the second part of that is the collaborative divorce kind of just like different stages that they go through? Like if they don't need a lawyer for divorce, they just kind of figure it out on their own, they get it all done. And then collaborative is kind of like the next level where they're largely talking to each other, but it's not really high conflict. So they do that. And at the very top end, it's like you have the typical divorce lawyers where they're kind of fighting it out in court. So it's just kind of like, is it just different levels of what they need?
Well, I mean, so you don't know what you don't know. So I do recommend when people are getting divorced that they at least have, if they're not going to have their own lawyer, that they're working with an attorney mediator that can educate them on the law. And I also do a lot of mediations. I still advise them to have their own consulting attorney, even if I'm acting as a mediator. Because as a mediator, I can educate them. I can tell them this is what you can do, but I can't say this is what you should do. Um, when I was litigating, what I saw on that other end is, people would come back after the divorce was done, and there were all sorts of errors in the judgment, either because they did it themselves or, they tried to use somebody who was a non-attorney mediator, and so they missed some of the law. And once you have that settlement agreement done, it's really hard to fix things later. So you're making financial decisions that are going to impact the rest of your life. You're making decisions related to custody that are going to impact your children's lives. So on that level of if we can get along and we're aligned with our agreements, taking that step in mediation may make sense because then they at least know what they're agreeing to, what their rights are, and what should be contained in there.
Okay. So then, with most of the clients that you work with, would you say that the collaborative divorce is more common, that you have the couple that they largely get along? I mean, they kind of agree on this. They're fairly open and agreeable, and it's just a matter of, hey, we need guidance on how to go through this process. Or is it maybe not, I don't want to say tense, but a little bit more like a, hey, we're getting divorced. Let's just get a lawyer involved. They can be the mediator, and we'll just be professional about this.
Yeah, so in a collaborative process, I have some cases where they get along
Mm,
nicely and work together,
mhm,
not the majority. So the
mm,
majority of my collaborative cases, and I'm seeing more of a trend. People are attracted to this model because it's private and confidential. So
mm,
we'll use a lot of people that are either they're public figures and they want it because they don't want to have all their dirty laundry in the courthouse. They
mm,
don't necessarily get along like each other. So these can be very high conflict personalities that just don't want to be high conflict in front of a courtroom.
mm.
Other times we work with a lot of high net worth individuals in the collaborative process because again, they don't want all their financial information in front of the courthouse. So those people, people that are in law enforcement often want a collaborative case because there's things to be protected. So
Okay.
it's this private confidential container, um, but it doesn't mean low conflict. But you have attorneys that are trained and skilled to help them come up together. And realistically, even in litigated cases, probably about 5% of them actually go to trial. So there's some sort of family law courts are encouraging you to try to settle your case and
Got
to try to come up with agreements.
got it. Okay.
So yeah, so we'll do that. And then there's other cases that I work as a mediator with. Both people will bring their attorneys in and maybe we'll do a settlement conference for a day so I can see if I can help align on certain issues. And maybe not all the issues will be resolved through mediation, but as many as possible.
Okay. And you mentioned working with some high net worth individuals as well. I know you also specialize in untangling equity compensation. So, like if
Yes.
someone has all their money in a company or in, let's say, real estate, it's not easy. Oh, just give me half the money. It's like not so easy. So how do you typically approach that when the money that one spouse has is kind of tied up in an asset?
So yeah, so there's different ways to handle that. So real estate we're going to handle a little bit different than equity compensation like stock options, RSUs. Sometimes we have individuals and maybe there's several different properties and they get their income from rental properties. In some cases, we'll make decisions to have each spouse receive certain properties and we'll try to offset it and balance it out. Maybe we'll have a structured buyout. And other cases, I've had some cases where they co-own a business. We change the documents. So while they're divorcing, maybe both spouses are actively involved in that business. So they're going to choose to co-own that business for a while. Or maybe one of the spouses is going to keep the business, but they're going to have a structured payout of that business to the other spouse. So there's a lot of solutions that we can put in there so that, both spouses are whole. And then maybe there's liens that are placed on the property so it can't be sold out from under their spouse. So the judgment might be written, okay, when this property sells, I'm going to get this amount, or we're going to take out some HELOCs, or, just restructure things. So that's how we might do it if their income is from various properties.
Okay.
On cases where somebody's an owner of a business and their pay is through this equity compensation, we're going to need to do a more detailed analysis. So that's where our financial neutral may come in and they'll help us look at, when were these shares granted? When are they vesting? And we may have some shares that the community has an interest in and some shares that have a separate interest. So there's going to be several different payout structures. And so when those shares vest, a percentage of them may transfer to the other spouse. So, and we have different ways that we write those orders. So the shares themselves are transferring. And then, again, we might have different agreements where there's either a cash payout on the business if there's other assets. So sometimes we have a house that the equity in that house maybe matches the equity in the business. So we're going to take a look at the whole picture and what assets there are and try to find ways that we can allocate this in a way where both spouses are made whole.
Okay. Now, I've got another two-part question for you.
Of course.
One, I'm sure when it comes to divorce, a lot of people think also about prenup agreements. So are prenups kind of a part of what you do in your practice? And also the second part of that is, what are your thoughts on prenups? Like, would you recommend it? Would you not recommend it? And why?
So I think prenups are an amazing tool, actually. I think most couples should have one, if not all. And I do a real I also use that collaborative model in my premarital agreements. I am just so you know, in pre-publication on a book slash workbook about premarital agreements. And part of that is I really encourage facilitating communication. So when you sit down and you and your spouse are getting ready to do a prenup, it makes you have really hard conversations that maybe you've never had with your spouse. So I'm going to be asking this couple, are you planning on having children? Okay, if you're planning on having children, is somebody going to leave their career to stay home with those children? And what is the expectation? And you would be shocked at how many people have not actually sat down and had these conversations. And we also want to take a look at what are their values? What are their goals, their values? How do they want to create wealth? How do they view wealth? Do we have somebody that's a spender or a saver? And so your premarital agreement is going to cover three general areas. So one is, how are we going to handle money during our marriage? What does that look like? Are we going to have joint accounts? Are we going to each have separate accounts? Are we going to have a combination? So we're going to have like this family bucket and each of us have our fun money. And how do we decide? Is that fun money going to, go along with California law so that when we earn it during the marriage, it's community? Or are we going to allocate a little bit that is our separate and nobody gets to tap into that if things don't work out? So I'm going to talk about how we handle things during the marriage. Are we going to care for our aging parents? Are we going to let them move into our home? Are we going to financially care for them? That's a conversation that many spouses haven't heard of or had before. And it's good to be on the same page before something happens to your parents. How are we going to handle children's expenses if somebody's leaving the workforce? Are we going to continue to build wealth together? How are we going to contribute maybe to an IRA for that parent that's no longer contributing because they've left the workforce temporarily? So all those discussions. So we're going to look at what happens during the marriage. And 100% of all marriages are going to end. The best ones are going to end through death. The other ones will end through divorce. So what's going to happen if we divorce? So we're going to set that up to try to keep them out of court. What are our expectations on spousal support? How are we going to divide property? What do we want to do? Do we want to have an agreement that we're going to try to do mediation or a collaborative process or use a private judge rather than going to court? And then the other area we cover is what happens if one of us dies, and this should be, it doesn't replace your estate plan, but it should be a bridge to your estate plan. And then also get those conversations going. So for example, we might have language that, within 90 days of returning to from their honeymoon, or within 90 days of being pregnant, they're going to go reach out and put together an estate plan. And these are some of the provisions they're going to make. So so we've got that. The other thing that we want to express and explore is, a lot of people are having children later in life, or I work with a lot of same-sex couples. So when we talk about family planning, oftentimes people are having children through IVF, through surrogacy, through either egg or sperm donation. And so we're going to have those conversations, and possibly build in some of those terms in that premarital agreement as well.
Okay. Now, we talked about quite a few things, but what would you say are some of the most common misconceptions you hear from your clients when it comes to divorce or family law, or even things where it's like you tell us them and they're like, "Oh, I didn't even know that was a thing."
So yeah, so some of the greatest misconceptions are, if an account is in my name, it's my account. And so I'll have people come in, and this is both in the premarital agreement when we're talking about community versus separate property, but also in a divorce case where they're like, oh, we're just going to keep everything separate. We're going to keep separate accounts. Well, the law in California says that when you earn money during the marriage, that money, the minutes earned, absent any other agreement, is community property. So if I take my paycheck and I put it in my account that just says Patricia Van Haren, it's still community income because I've earned it during the marriage. So that's what the law is looking at, is when was that income earned, not where was it earned. So that's one thing. The other thing people will end up on the other end is, oh, well, his mother gave him a house during the marriage. She died, and she gave him this house, so that's community property because we got it during the marriage. Well, an inheritance does not become community property. So if somebody's mother dies and leaves them a house that's fully paid for, that house is separate property. Now, if there's a mortgage on the house and the couple is paying towards that mortgage, then the community may get an interest in that house. So that's where things can be very confusing, as what is community property, what is separate property, and we can go down the line of every type of asset or account to really flesh that out.
Okay. Now, I think another one misconception. Oh, I don't know. I guess that's why I'm asking: is this a misconception or not? But I believe a lot of people. 'Cause I even thought this, and I had to look this up. Is that if people in California are living together for like 7 years, but they're not married, then they basically considered everything's community property. Is that true or not, or is that a myth?
That is not true. So California does not have common law spouses or common law marriage. There are ways that people can get an interest in property or support in, it's more of a civil action, so it wouldn't be a family law action. It's a civil action based on what's called a Marvin action, based on the marriage of Marvin. So we name actions after different cases. But it's more in contract law. So if I tell somebody, hey, if you move in with me and raise my children, you never need to work again. I'm going to take care of you forever. I've now made this oral contract, this oral agreement to a spouse, or not a spouse, but my cohabitant.
Mhm.
And so if I later marry them, or even if I don't marry them, they may have a civil action based on that Marvin case, because I've made these promises. They've relied on these promises. They've quit their job. They've moved into my home. They're making improvements, caring for my children, but it doesn't make them a spouse, and they're not a common law spouse.
Got it. Okay. And another, I think, misconception is that I guess when it comes to divorce, I think most people would think that, oh, okay, well, if we go through divorce, we have to go to court, judge can decide on everything and just that's it. But it sounds like that's more the exception than the rule. It seems like in most times, just they work it out with the lawyer. They don't even have to go to court. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people still go to court because they think that they have to.
Mm,
So, the more education and awareness we can raise that they don't need to go to court. But yeah, most of my cases have never seen a courtroom.
wow.
So, and even in cases where maybe we need a little additional help, we can bring in, especially if the couple, if privacy is important, there's ways to keep your case private, even if you don't agree. So, one tool we might use is bringing in a private judge, or a lot of my agreements, the final agreements that are signed, will have a confidential agreement that's signed by a retired judge that now acts as a private judge, and it's a confidential settlement agreement, and we only file the bare bones of what's necessary to have the case be legal with the court. So there's ways to stay out of court, one, for the sake of your kids, and two, just for that privacy.
Hmm. Now, what would you say is some of the biggest mistakes people make before they call a lawyer, kind of going through this process?
Well, I mean, so one of the biggest mistakes that they make is to um do things that might put them in a way like taking their children outside of the state of California, for example. Maybe they're mad. They're like, I'm going to go stay with my mom in New York. I'm leaving with the kids. And then their spouse goes and files a case in California. And then they have to bring the children back because the children haven't lived in New York for 6 months. And so now their spouse ends up having the children with them rather than them having the children. So making unilateral decisions is a problem. Um, Hiding assets is never a good one. Courts don't like that. Everything's discoverable.
Mhm.
So that's another one. And then also coming to your own agreements when you don't know or understand. So not having enough information is a common problem where I've seen people come in later and maybe they've said, okay, I never need to receive spousal support just because they want to get this case over with and be done with it. And sometimes there's ways to permanently waive that. And maybe they're not working or they haven't been working and they think, oh, well, child support's going to cover me. And it really doesn't. And so, they put themselves in a bad financial situation.
Got it. Okay.
Oh,
And let's say that someone is looking for a family law attorney. They're going through divorce for the first time. They're not quite sure who to go to. What advice would you give to this person as they're doing their search so they can find that lawyer who has the knowledge, has the experience, can really kind of guide them through this entire process?
yeah, so I mean, one thing is I would look at and see, first reach out to your friends. Who do you have any friends that have been divorced? What was their experience with their lawyers? Now, not all two cases are the same, so don't fixate on that and say, "Oh, well, my friend's getting 50,000 a month in spousal support, so I should be getting that." But maybe your spouse only makes 10,000 a month. You're not going to get the same number, but find out what their experience was. Did they like them?
Mm,
See if your lawyer has published articles. Do they know what they're saying? Are they educating the community? Are they an expert in their path? And see if your lawyer does keep cases out of court. I think it's important. One thing I heard another collaborative lawyer say is, the way to guarantee that your spouse is not going to get a pit bull attorney is to go through a collaborative process,
mm,
to go through a process where both of you are committed to staying out of court. It's gonna, we're gonna look at ways, how do we keep the money in the family?
mm,
Um, there are law firms that will will litigate every issue. The other warning sign is if you go in and your demands are unreasonable and your lawyer's saying, yeah, we can fight for that. So let's say you have a loving, capable other parent and you're like, I'm mad at them. They had an affair, so I want sole custody. If your lawyer's saying, oh, yeah, we can get you that, it's probably not going to happen. And so you're going to be fighting, you're going to be wasting money fighting battles. So have somebody that will realistically say, this is what you can expect. Here's where you might prevail, but here's where you may have to give a little.
Okay. And when it comes to the future, I mean, where do you think the future of family law is going? Like, is there any changes people really need to pay attention to?
I think a lot more cases are hearing more about that collaborative process we were discussing. Up to like 10 years ago, only 2% of cases were going through the collaborative process. People were still going to court because there wasn't enough education awareness. I think as we go to the future, people are wanting their privacy more. They value that. They value family values. So I think that's something we're going towards the future. The other thing that I see us doing a lot more in the future is having children through, IVF has expanded greatly. So people who were previously unable to have children together are now able to be parents, whether it's through surrogacy, through sperm or egg donation. So we're seeing that people are also waiting to have children. So they're establishing their careers, and some of them are preemptively either freezing their eggs or creating these embryos and choosing to use IVF because they've spent that time and they've made that investment. So I see a lot more going on in that arena as well.
Got it. Okay. Well, Patricia, I have one last question for you, but before I ask it, I do want to point people to your website at www.caflg.com. Now, last question for you, Patricia. What does peace of mind mean to you?
Ah, that's very good. Yeah, I mean, honestly, there's no price tag on peace of mind. The ability to be able to lay your head down at night and get a good night's sleep because you're not worried about what's going to happen tomorrow or how you're going to make things work or will your children be okay. I often use the term the price of peace. What is peace worth it to you when we're going through a case? And if I can get you that peace, where can we make some movement here and come to some resolutions?
Okay. Well, there you have it. Patricia sharing her expertise. So, Patricia, where can people contact you and your practice?
All right, so you gave our website, that www.caflg.com. You can also give us a call. Our Irvine number is 949-688-8880. And our other numbers are on our website as well. So the best way to get in touch is check us out, read our profiles, and we hope to hear from you soon.
Awesome. Well, this was great. Thank you, Patricia, for coming on, and thank you for sharing all your knowledge.
Well, thank you for having me, and have a great day.
Thanks for listening to the Verdict Signal podcast. Any questions? Please contact the practice directly with the contact information provided during the show. We'll see you again next time. Bye for now.